And so 4 people are on it.
Okay. So we should just leave it like that.
Yep.
Here's my question.
It's like a group
Or do I say I just have the first question?
I say you say yes. Can I interrupt? Is there a restroom?
Okay.
And why are you? No, I don't want to. I just said.
Okay, we have a couple of leftovers. Is there time in the program for shopping?
Yes, so right afterwards, we're gonna be doing kind of the shopping, and Rebecca here will help you out, and.
Shopping at 7:30 or you mean?
Oh, so yeah, 7:30, right.
Or like before.
Give us time. Would you like to have the name tag?
Of course I would.
No, good. No, it wasn't like, can you please get me a glass of wine? I forget it. No, let me have my ginger tea first and ease into it.
Shot of vodka in there,
So maybe just like 5 more minutes.
Yeah, they said to eat before, so I had a snack.
What kind of an event?
It's Aaron Parks Trio. One of the guys who's filming is really into music. We really have to go. We've gone with it up front. So
I took a, I'm gonna go check it. I took away that.
It's what it is. It's
Oh, I think that's what that is. Oh, you're right.
That's good. I had a friend who said she was going to join.
Oh, that's nice.
She's got that sweater. Oh, well.
Yeah, a decent amount. I mean, we've probably done
Oh.
You guys are getting your more casual.
I didn't know what we had. It's just going to be lovely, but it's good to see you.
What's the
Are you happy? Thanks for having
No, of course, I'm coming.
I know. We're ready to go home. To your dog.
What's that?
take your pants off?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll vote by Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Come on in. Melissa.
There you go, Miss Melissa.
Love your jacket.
Feel free to take your seat. We'll be starting in just a few moments. But there's refreshments, of course. Okay. Whatever you
But no one's calling you.
Just come in and check in. Yeah, great. Hold on, I have.
Okay, great. I know we had like a string of bets, so it was like that. Maybe we'll wait for that.
So she keeps wording it for us because we can't wear a wig.
Hanging out on Broadway.
It's a Broadway. Broadway is one big party right now.
Oh, no, I'm not on it anymore. Regular guys don't like me.
Okay, come on in. The door is unlocked. You come up to the 7th floor. So they don't do they?
We're too proud. And I thought, see, has a bowling. We need to. Be the mistake, but they look like they're pretty sweet.
Somewhere over there.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. No worries. We'll figure it out.
You think about serving, especially for one of
Hey.
I love that too. Context is perfect. So sometimes I see it, and you wait till like
That's why
I just wrote down
thank you very much.
I've
you're sitting right on the hall. What's your
Yeah, so you get,
No, what's the get myself situated here. In the restroom, the little stuff.
Okay. I just had coffee that made it.
We're just pointing at your jacket.
Or this one.
Oh, let's see.
This, I think this one is the right one.
I'm more fatigued.
More than this one. Let's see, you get one. Hey, Antonia, let's see, you,
I'm pointing at her.
I know, that, what, let's see, you get it.
It's my one.
Yeah, you get one. I actually think this is.
I like the blue.
Oh, it doesn't have any buttons.
But there is one. So it's a little bit longer.
Oh. Okay, well, I got the safe clothing. I gotta get my water.
Yeah. Can we serve people?
What's your name?
No, I just had coffee.
Yes, you should, Francis. Yes. Here's your and your like this thing.
Yes.
I just had some coffee and my brain is gonna go. I need to see
And you're coming that is a line of the flexibility.
Like a Christian Easter.
Yeah. Or azalea.
Azalea? I like azalea.
Definitely an April color.
I'm just guessing the Easter egg. So the true story for folks, and then there are the ones we heard on the phone when I'm trying to select something.
And you share an office.
We share everything on it.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. Okay. Yep. You got yours. Perfect.
Where's Tracy?
She said she's gonna get a tray.
Hi. Hold on a second, ladies. We're going to check in right here with Angela.
My name is Miranda Wolf.
Yeah, that's fine. We can also we'll get you your name tag too. So you said Lisa. Yeah, Lisa, the yellow, and then we'll get. Well, and then we'll have you, if you want, to write your name down as well. So we'll make her a time.
There's someone downstairs waiting for you. The door's open. It's, you just have to open the door. Yeah. Well, obviously, they hung up. They hung up?
just reached
You don't want me to go?
Oh, the elevator.
You want me to write my name?
If you can write it down here with your email as well, and then we'll make you your name tag.
I know.
She was the best.
like, I love my friends that I don't really get to know.
Hi, welcome. What would your first name be?
You wanted them?
Okay. And then you would like to make your name tag as Melissa?
Nice to see you. How are you doing? I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself? Good, you look great. Well, thank you.
It's the best.
You look unchanged. I guess that's a thank you. Yes. How's everything? Oh, thank you. It's good. You know each other, don't you? You look okay.
May I try this one? Or you'll customer? May I try this second?
Yes, yes, of course, feel free. And the little phone piece, yeah, you can just put. Thank you. Thank you so much. Miss Lisa?
Our daughter just got married to a guy she was a dancer. Michelle was very into that process. And
Generous sizing.
working at Rent the Runway and was working for Love that.
Here you go, Miss
Thank
Melinda.
you. Thank you. So yeah, she's doing whoa. And do you like the guy? Love him.
Yeah, I'll swing this way and then we'll move it. Yes.
What do you think, Ben?
I'll move it back. It's just people in the walkway, but I'll move it back.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Looks very nice on you.
You can check in, right?
They said you were on your way too, so.
No, you're fine. You came just in time. We're gonna
Can I get you a water or wine?
Thank you.
Sure. I'm Rebecca. Yes.
The third guy.
I
spoke to you.
Yes. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Oh, thank you. Yes. Have a seat. Go ahead, sit.
No, I was in the front. I'm not brave. Did you meet her?
You can try a jacket. Oh, I was like, try a jacket, come to the front room. I love the flower jacket. I cannot, very charming. It's very different. Let's be judging, let's decide what's good.
I think it would be a great way to go shopping, have everybody's opinion.
It's like say yes to the dress.
Ready?
Yes. There's another seat up here, if somebody wants a seat up front.
Yes, Beth, do you want to come?
I
switched for you.
Just need us. Yeah. We need a lot of people named Beth.
I know, right. You have to front load the best.
Packing the place for the vets. Welcome, everybody, to the Nina McLemore New York City showroom. We're so excited to have these three ladies here talking about their book, You Should Smile More. And for those of you who are live streaming, if you have any questions, you can email them to Rebecca@ninamclemore.com. For all of you here in the audience today, we do have some index cards, so if you'll put your email on there and your question, if we don't get to it this evening, I will definitely get it to them, and we will make sure that we answer your question. All right, so I'd like to welcome Katie, C, and Lori.
Thank you. Before we get started, I just want to say what we're going to give you tonight, because I know everyone, especially those in the room, want to have a little more wine, a little wine and cheese, is we'll give you kind of a little sprinkling of what we normally do when we're out in front of a big audience. So it'll just be like a little snack-sized portion, and then we'll have lots of time to eat and to drink, and most importantly, to try and hopefully buy some of the beautiful clothing here. So thanks everybody for being here.
We're modeling.
Yeah, we are modeling, yes. We're not just sticking to the script. So I'm Lori, I'm wearing a lovely wool crepe
great. Collar up, sleeves up. You don't know me well enough to know this, but I'm always warm, so it'll be great to see if I can make it through like the next 20 minutes without taking the blazer off. C, on the other hand, has a blazer, a turtleneck, likely a second turtleneck on underneath it. And, I don't know. Yes. Okay, so, anyway, so hi everybody, hi everyone on the Zoom. I'm Lori Marcus. Just a very quick background about me. So I spent 24 years at PepsiCo, and then I had a second chapter. I was in retail. I was up at Keurig Green Mountain. Love to see some friends here from that chapter of my life. I was at Peloton in the early days. I did a stint up at an accelerator up at Harvard Business School, and now I serve on corporate boards. I do executive coaching of senior executives, and then I'm a founding member of the Band of Sisters. I'm also looking at everyone in the audience saying, how do I know you? And so my claim to fame is I think I'm in more sort of women's networking groups than anybody. So if anyone out here is Wharton Women, EWAB, C200, Women's Forum, let's connect. Oh, let me tell you a little bit more about the restaurant. Yeah, that's it, thanks, yeah. So as for the Band of Sisters, we all work together for over a decade at PepsiCo, which is, you know, how we all met. And then we've all gone on to do other things, serve on boards, executive coaches, advisors, investors, et cetera. And I'll just give you the quick background of how we wrote this book together. So we didn't set out to write a book. About 5 years ago, we were at a very small dinner with Indra Nooyi, who had just retired as the CEO, chair of the board of PepsiCo. And we're at this very small dinner, about 6 of us in Greenwich, Connecticut. And we started talking about, I don't really remember how this came up, but somehow it came up that I was one of the founding members of the first ever Women's Resource Network at Pepsi in 1993. Now you can imagine when we speak to large audiences, there's a lot of people in the audience who have that moment where they say, huh, it's funny, I wasn't born then. Everyone like, she must be really old. But anyway, so we started talking about that, but then somehow at dinner we started talking about like the little things that happen at work, not just at PepsiCo, but at other places as well, and certainly now in our lives as you know, people who serve on boards. What we found were there were these little moments that made us feel like we didn't fully belong and we couldn't bring our full selves to work. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about that.
So first we'll introduce ourselves beyond Lori.
Yes.
I'm Katie Lacey. I spent 12 years at PepsiCo. I think for all of us these were really foundational and critical years for us. I went from there to ESPN where I ran marketing, and then to Crane Stationery where I was president and CEO, and also a founding member of the Band of Sisters. And you know, since we wrote the book, we've been out talking to a lot of companies. We've probably talked to about 50 companies across every different industry. We've kind of amazed ourselves, from law firms to finance to military to retail to packaged goods, good news, bad news, gender bias travels everywhere. So we have found an audience there, which has been very, very rewarding. And while this audience is mostly women, we do have one gentleman in the back. We try and really get men into the room, because what we're going to talk about a lot here is about how we call men in and have men be part of this conversation, because we really view it as a conversation. And you know, as Lori said, we're going to talk a lot about moments. We'll give examples. And for me, and this is where we usually, you know, kind of share what happened to us, my moment that sticks out is the one that became the title of the book. I had just started a new job. I was pretty senior. I was getting a review, and as part of my review, I was told that I should smile more.
So while Katie, like it was probably the same year, was told that she should smile more, I was literally being told that I should smile less. Different company, you know, different city. But like imagine this, my whole career was built on, you know, like building culture, forming teams, being the kind of leader that people wanted to work with and for. And then at some point I was told, I love this word, I didn't have enough gravitas. Somebody please explain to me what that word means. But I was basically told I didn't have enough gravitas. I needed to have more distance between myself and my team. I smiled too much. I was too accessible. And so my question that I kept asking myself is like, what do you do with that super helpful information?
my smile was just right.
Goldilocks.
My name is Sue Nicholson. I was at Pepsi for 11 years. I was the chief marketing officer when I left. After PepsiCo, I was a chief marketing officer for Equinox, I'm sure many of you are members of. And then I went on to work at a startup in a digital company that was eventually bought by Google. I'm now on a corporate board for an insurance company. I've been on it for since 2009. But the most interesting thing about me, hands down, is I do handstands all over the world. I need to do them until I'm 70, so I have 10 more years. We'll see if I make it. So for me, the little things were exacerbated by the fact that I went through my career as like a closeted lesbian. So it was even that much further, kind of further removed. But since I bring this up and we're in this store, I'm pointing out that because I'm not closeted anymore, I actually just got married in November.
Congrats.
This is my wife's outfit. And the thing I always say is I wear this outfit a lot. I went to a Seder 2 nights ago. Like my ROI on my wedding outfit, outstanding. These were one and done. Stupid. Okay, so one of our sisters that's not here is Mitzi. She's a black female, and for her, she went through her whole career with obviously even the biggest burden of all of us. And she was often the only one in the room, the only black female, so she was always trying to represent all of black women, so it was just even that much more challenging. But so we all had these moments, but with that said, we all made it. We're in the C-suite, we're now on boards, we're doing executive coaching, but we're shocked that these little things that happen are still happening today. And the reason we know they're happening today is we went out and did tons of research with younger women and asked them all these questions. And anything we talk about today, anything that's in our book, unfortunately, is alive and well and is still happening. So with that, we thought, gosh, how do we use our power and our voices now to try to see if we can have it so it's not happening the next 30 years.
So our thesis, and the main thing that we talk about, is that this wall of gender inequity is not, it's not three things that happen to you in your life. It is the little things. It's day in, day out, week after week, month after month, and they're generally really small. They feel petty. They're not something that you're going to bring up, but they do add up and they create a wall. And they create a reason for women to opt out of the workplace, to feel like they can't bring them to their full selves, and they really don't allow a company to have the most robust performance, obviously not the right levels of inclusion, and they ultimately will cost a company money. So what we did was, as we looked at all these things, we thought, okay, there's tons of research, as Steve said, both the primary research as well as the secondary research. There's tons of research out there on the impact of these things. But what there isn't a lot of is a lot of practical advice about things that you can do. So we're not academics, we are not HR professionals, but we are operators. We have a collective 150 years of operating, and that's what we really try and bring to life here. And the way we do it is by making these things easy to recognize and easy to talk about. And one of the key things that evolved as we were writing the book is, at first it was like, okay, what do we have to offer here? What can we talk about other than our own experiences? And looking back at our careers, a lot of our experiences were about fitting into a culture that existed, right? So you could say that we accommodated. This was a male-driven culture, and we figured out how to survive and thrive in that. That is not what today's young women want to do, and that is not how you drive change. So by bringing not just the women who are experiencing these moments into the conversation and giving them advice, we really try to reach out to leaders, allies, people who are in the room, people who have power, men and women, because one of the things that you realize as you read the book and as we talk about it is we've been on both sides of a lot of these things, and we've both been the recipient and probably unwittingly the perpetrator, because it's just the way the world works. So we're going to give you some of the examples, and as we said, we're giving you guys a little bit of a snippet of the way that we tend to talk to a larger audience, but we're going to try and give you an idea of what it looks like. And even though this is a room full of really senior women, I'm going to guess there's a lot of things here that you still experience. Maybe it's not in your first job, but it's in the boardroom, or it's there are ways that that bias can creep into our everyday lives.
So I'll start off with an example. We call it Great Idea Greg. I'm sure we all probably experience it probably today. So you know, a woman's in a meeting, you say something, doesn't really go there anywhere, the meeting goes on, 5 minutes later, Greg says the same idea, and all of a sudden it gets momentum, we're like, oh, that's a good idea, and the conversation goes. So that's one of those times where it's hard to say like, hey, I just said that, or you just don't want to say that. But it's a really big deal because the fact that this is one of the research will say this is one of the reasons that women are opting out. They don't feel valued and heard, and so it's a really big deal. So this is a great way where a witness and an ally can help and say, hey, that's a great build on Lori's idea, and bring it back to the person who said it, get them involved so that they're not just sitting there, you know, excluded. So one little example.
So another example, one of my favorites, is I'll call it lazy language. So it's a group of things, and this is meant to be super casual, so feel free to like raise your hand or something when you recognize these. So these usually happen in hiring and performance reviews, but not exclusively. So there's a set of language that exists for women, and it's things like people say like, she's just not a good fit, or they'll say like, she's too emotional. And it's super vague, but it kind of sits out there, and it goes from being somebody's opinion to all of a sudden it's fact. And then, so that's something that people say that's kind of lazy language around women. And then the corresponding sort of a cousin of that is he's a great guy. And it's never like, he's a great sales executive, he's a great lawyer, he's great at this, he's great at closing deals. It's just, he's a great guy. And it's kind of, and people say it literally when you're doing people planning sessions, reviewing candidates, and it's very ambiguous, and it's just sort of, it's like aggrandizing in a way that you can't really put your finger on it. Like, we know him from New Canyon Country Club, or, he was, went to this school, or we knew him from Sigma Chi. And so what happens is this sort of, that language that's just sort of without realizing it really holds women back. There's an equal set of language that is very aggrandizing to men. So what do you do about it? Again, if you're the woman, if you're an ally of any gender, a witness, or if you're a leader of any gender. And one of the things that always works is something we learned at Pepsi actually, which is situation, behavior, impact. So you just say, when someone says that, instead of just writing it down like it's a fact, someone says, oh, she's too emotional, you say, can you say more about that? Can you talk to me? What was the specific situation that you're referring to? Love to hear more about that. What was the behavior that you're talking about? And then the most important thing is the impact. Just say, can you talk about what the impact of that was? Because 9 times out of 10, what you'll find is it was a style point. It wasn't something that really had any impact on the business, on the customer, on anything like that. So situation, behavior, impact.
Another area, sorry.
Well, just, you
Yeah,
say it
please.
doesn't have any impact on whatever, but do you think the person who says she was too emotional is saying that they're uncomfortable working with the even if it didn't have outward impact, do you think they think it has?
Sometimes, I think sometimes when people say something like that, it's about them, but then when you actually say what was the impact, they're not gonna say, well, it made me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And yet, most people won't lie and say, oh, I think the customer reacted poorly. But it's just like, if you can get people talking in a way that's not defensive, whatever was behind it, usually once you get them, you diffuse the situation, exactly.
So another area, and one of my favorite chapters, we call Father of the Year. And this is, I see head nods already.
Yeah, we're gonna do a game where you we'll say the thing and then you have to guess what this scenario is and guess the advice.
It's basically, okay, let's take the thing that's been holding women back for decades and let's turn it around and make it an asset for men. And, the situation is, I think the way that this can show itself is you've got Joe. Joe's got a couple kids, he's coaching his daughter's soccer team, so he leaves every Wednesday at 3 and goes off to coach her game. And everybody in the office, they're practically carrying him out on their shoulders while they're all saying, what a great dad. And then, Susan comes in late the next morning because her daughter woke up with an earache and had to go to the doctor. She's late for the staff meeting and there's a little bit of an eye roll. Susan's not been that reliable. And this is something that happens on both sides. A lot of times it can be the women in the office always pointing out that Joe's a great dad. So what we really try, the main takeaway on this is equal acknowledgement. Equal acknowledgement for all family responsibilities, and just both genders, all genders need to check themselves on this one and make sure that it's equal.
So my favorite chapter is Who's the New Girl? So the fact that we call women girls drives me bonkers. And you hear it all the time, we met the new girl in accounting, we just hired the new girl from Harvard. You would never hear it the other way. No one says we just hired a new boy out of Harvard. You can't even say it with a straight face. And words matter, they set the tone. If we think our male colleagues, we think of their female colleagues as girls, we're gonna think like, hey, this should be the next, C-suite executive. I think we're kidding ourselves. So words set the tone, they matter. A lot of the language, and a girl is one my particular pinprick, but there are a lot of words out there that are more positive with men. It's manpower and gentleman's agreement, and all those things are more positive. With women, a lot of times, throw like a girl. It's Debbie Downer. So just people should be cognizant of language. Again, if you wouldn't say it about a man, don't say it about a woman.
So I'm gonna we usually go deep on about, 3 different deep dives. We're gonna do one tonight and just give you a feel for kind of one of the scenarios, and then different ways for, for women who experience this, for allies of any gender, and for leaders of any gender. So this section is called Be Like Bill. And what this is really about is, I should make you guess, what do you think this section is about? So this is about how women apply to when there's plum assignments, or they want a promotion or a raise. The research suggests that women apply to 20% fewer jobs than men do. And the reason is, when women tend to see a list of a requirements or a job description, they look at it as requirements. And so if they don't have 90 or 95% plus of the requirements, they won't apply to the job. On the other hand, men tend to look at it as kind of this honest overconfidence. They look at it and they say, oh, you know what, I have 50%, that's great, and the other 50% I'll learn on the job, that'll be a great experience for me. And so it's not that men are gaming the system or anything like that, it's actually a really good example of, like I said, where women are they're holding themselves to this higher standard, so they're not applying, they're not asking. What the research also suggests is women aren't crazy. They're not being paranoid about this. The research suggests that men tend to get rewarded based on their potential, and women tend to get rewarded based on their accomplishments that they've already achieved. So women they're sort of reading the room correctly, but by not doing anything about it, this problem or situation will continue on. So let's talk about what we can do about it.
So early in my career, I totally was not like Bill. I remember when I got my first job out of Indiana graduate school, I called my mom, I'm like, I just got a job, $42,000 a year. If I never get another raise, I will be rich. I'm so excited. And then a year later, I got promoted, and I was an associate, and I had a little office, and then and I was bonus eligible, then a better office, and every time I was like, this is amazing. And I noticed all my male colleagues were irritated. They're the office was too small, facing the wrong direction, the raise sucked, and they were always pissed off, and they were all men, and I was always happy. And I was thinking, all of a sudden, as I thought about it, looking back, I totally made it so easy for them when they're like, oh, we only have one promotion spot. She's so happy, let's keep her in place for another year. But Joe's gonna quit, or gosh, we only have 4%, how do we balance it? I guarantee I would have done better had I been a little bit more like Bill. So I think that, I tell my nieces to do this. I mean, I would have done it in a nice, respectful way, but I think I made it very easy for my companies to not have to worry about me. And then the other mistake I made was, if I was comparing myself, I'd be comparing myself to Lori and Katie. We're about the same. But had my benchmark was run, I should have been comparing myself to Bob and Joe, and I probably wouldn't have been as happy.
So, and this is another area where we also talk about what things that you can do as a manager, as a leader. And one of my stories here is when I was working at ESPN, I worked for a guy who was very accessible, would always have breakfasts and lunches with employees, and I could always tell who was going to have lunch with him because it was usually a guy, and he'd show up in a tie. So it was like a sure giveaway he was having lunch with boss. But then, I'd be having a conversation around talent review, performance planning, whatever, and he would know these guys. He knew them better. He knew what they were doing, and he would advocate for them. So I started coaching the women on my team, get on his calendar. He's very accessible. You just have to reach out and get on his calendar. Some of them did. The other ones were like, what am I going to talk to him about? I don't want to do that. Lots of reasons why it just wasn't something that they wanted to do. So rather than continuing to push them, I just figured out, all right, I'm going to create situations for them. 15 minutes. I'm going to grab Catherine and Susan. They just came up with a great little study that is going to give him a talk point that he can walk around the office with. He's going to know what they did, and it's going to help level that playing field. So there are things that, and it worked out. I mean, he got more familiarity, not rocket science by any stretch, but just kind of taking the time to figure out, okay, this is the cultural situation in the company. How do I help level the playing field for my own team?
So I want to round this section out with a story of what allies can do, and this is a real story that happened for me. And so, quick background. So I was on a not-for-profit board, just by way of background, Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, multiple myeloma, incurable form of blood cancer. And the reason that that's relevant is it's a leading cancer research not-for-profit. So keep that in mind. I was the vice chair of the board. I was on the phone with a guy, we'll call him Mike because that was his name, and he was the chair of the board. And we were having calls all the time because we were doing CEO succession, and those involved in board work and in the C-suite know that that's a lot of what you do when you're on a board. Anyway, it was before Zoom, but we were doing that thing where you're like on calls all the time and you have like 2 of you are on the phone, you're waiting for the third person, so you're making small talk that at any moment when the third person joins in, you can immediately sort of jump in, so you don't get into anything deep. So we were doing the whole like, hey, Lori, you still commuting up to Boston to work for Keurig? No, I didn't tell you. I left Keurig. I came back to Connecticut and I really want to join corporate boards. Oh, what are you doing? Are you still working for XYZ company, Mike? No, actually I left that company and I started a private equity firm. And he said, oh, that's interesting that you want to do board service. We just bought a company in Ohio. They're in the DNA testing area. And he said, that's funny, what a coincidence. We're looking for a board member who has retail, branding, e-commerce, marketing experience, but also someone who knows healthcare. I guess you can probably guess what I said. So I said, oh, Mike, that would be really interesting to me. I'm so embarrassed by this story. But I said, obviously I have the retail and the branding and the marketing experience, but I don't have any healthcare experience. And at that moment, Mike could have done nothing. He could have just went on. I'm sure at that point, the third person probably joined the call. He could have just done nothing. And then he could have gone on with his search, hired Beth and the folks at TrueStar to help him with the board search. And instead what he did was like the ultimate ally moment. And he said, and I remember his exact words, this is 2015, and I remember his words. He said, Mrs. Marcus, might I remind you that you are the vice chair of the board of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. You have forgotten more about healthcare than most people in this country will ever know. And I sort of took the moment and I said, you know what, you're right, I would love to be considered for the board. I ended up joining that board. As those of you involved in board service know, your first corporate board is the hardest board to get on, and then from there I joined lots of others, ended up selling the company. It was great on all levels. But the thing that was mostly great about it was that day, Mike really showed me what allyship looked like. And one of the things, it wasn't just that he said, oh, come on, you'd be good. He was very specific. And so what I'd ask everyone here is, I would say in your personal life, in your professional life, everyone has an opportunity to be like Mike, where somebody maybe is being like a little cowering, they're not doing the power posting, they're not seeing themselves the way you see them. And so to the extent of just instead of just letting it go and be like, well, they don't see themselves that way, like pull them and be specific and be the ultimate ally. So again, if I could leave you with nothing else today, my Be Like Bill story is be like Mike.
Well, so what we're talking about is micro-offenses, right? And the good news about micro-offenses is that they can be solved with micro-actions. So there are little things, it's being like Mike. And as we've been out talking, we've heard some stories played back to us, people who have heard us, people who have read a book, people who have reacted and done something that they learned and had a positive reaction. And one of the ones that we heard early on was a guy who had read our book was out at a weekend work event. And he had a couple people on his team who were there who had kids. And he was just about to ask one of the women who worked for him who was watching the kids that weekend. And he caught himself. He realized he would never ask the guy who was watching the kids that weekend. So that was one, and she wouldn't have reacted. He wouldn't have known that he had misstepped, but it would have been another little brick in her wall. And so that was those are the small examples that we take, and that's how easy it is. And we talk a lot about like what you can do next.
Yeah, so we have another story where someone came back to us, so it's actually Angelique's story. She has a very good friend who's the CEO of an advertising agency here in New York. And he had read the book and he was at a meeting and he has 2 senior people, one runs the East, one runs the West, one's a man, one's a woman. and they come into a meeting, and the woman, we'll call her Susan, she just starts to project manage the meeting. Like, they're in there, and as she always does, she kind of starts to take the notes. And he stopped her and he said, you know what, Susan, you always take the notes in the meeting and you're very good at it, but we should share that responsibility. So I'm gonna ask John to take the notes today. And she, in our slide presentation, we actually have a copy of the email that she sent him, or the text that she sent him. And she said, I want you to know how seen I felt today. She said, I love working for you. I've always loved working for you, but never more do I love working for you than I do today. And she said, that little thing that you did to recognize that and to share the work equally and not always give the office housework to me. She said, I just want to thank you, and I want you to know how much I enjoy working with you and just how much that really increases my loyalty to you and overall to the company. So a tiny little thing. You just asked somebody else to take the notes. Not a big deal, but again, the opportunity to take one of the bricks out of her wall.
So I have an example that, because we're around all these clothing, I have a clothing example. So someone read our book, and they, there's a chapter called Mancentives, which is how a lot of times the swag bags and the various gifts you give corporate aid usually always focused around men. And so we actually did a survey of how many extra large golf shirts that we have.
I built a closet. I have so many, all the various Pepsi logos through 24 years. Yeah, so I would say
we have tons.
Several
I mean,
dozen.
like crazy, and everyone has them. It doesn't even seem odd anymore. When you get it, you're like, oh, my dad's gonna love this. Like it's just part of the sauce. But the equivalent would be, the guy goes to the sales meeting, he's in Vegas, he opens a bag, and it's like an extra small yoga top, right? That would never in a million years happen. It would be anarchy. But the opposite has been happening so long that we're just like, oh, my dad's gonna love this shirt. So anyway, so now that person is being much more sensitive about their swag bag. So those are a couple examples of stories we've heard back. We have tons of them. One of the things we usually do is to demonstrate how easy it is, these micro actions that you can do. It's not one of these 10-year projects and $1 billion to make progress. We actually tell people there are like things you can do this afternoon, and I usually rattle off 6 things that they can do in their next meeting or next afternoon. So the first one we tell people is, if you're a leader, get to the meeting early and get a sense what people are talking about, because usually the leader comes and the meeting starts. But if they get there a little earlier, they can kind of hear the conversation. Is it just a couple guys droning on about the Knicks and everyone else is not paying attention? They can kind of get in and kind of help shape the conversation. Another one is I brought my notes. Is the great idea, Greg. So that whole idea. If someone says something, you can
Day drinking.
Yeah. I'm not going to look at it, but holding it. So the great idea, Greg, again, and be an ally and help them. The idea of
office housework.
Okay, so we gave an example of the notes. The women should not be the ones, set up the retirement party, get the next Zoom call. I mean, on and on and on. It's so easy. Do a rotation and just not always make it be the same person. The idea.
About lazy language, see?
Oh yeah, lazy language. If you wouldn't say it, like if you wouldn't say it about a man, don't say it about a woman. Just think about your language.
Do you have a point of view about swearing?
Swearing. This is one of my favorites. When people will swear and say, "Pardon my French." Really? I mean, first of all, it's just like they think we're like these delicate flowers. That's not fucking the case. And then the second thing is like how I hear that is we be having so much fun, but season. So it's such this othering moment for me. And then the last one is we tell people count the room. Think of how it would be if you were the only black female, if you're the only female, or whatever the case may be, and help your sensitivity in that thing. So 6 things people can do today.
So what we'd love to do is, if people have a little wine left in their glass and you have a few minutes, we'd love to answer any questions that you have. I don't know if you can take them on the Zoom, but certainly in the room, and I would be very happy for it to be conversational. Feel free to answer each other's questions as well.
Okay. So, I'll start off with the first question.
Yeah.
Get the room warmed up. But so and the 3 of you can answer, one of you want to, how do you think your image affects the way you feel and those around you, either working for you, with you, or as colleagues?
You're like, you take the lady in the blue blazer and the cuffs up and the collar up. So what I would say about this question is, I think you have to be conscious and not naive about your image. I think to think that like nobody is looking at what you're wearing, how you're dressing, all of that, I think that's naive. So I think you could make a decision about how you want to show up. I grew up in an era where you were told, dress for the part that you want, dress for the part that's 2 levels above where you are now. Don't dress for where you are, dress for where you want to go. Are we using a sports analogy? I would say skate where the puck is going. So I think that's like the broad answer. And we have young people who say to us, well, I don't want to dress like you do. I don't want to dress all corporate. And what I always say is, you know what, that's a conscious decision. Look at how the women are dressed who are 2 or 3 levels above you. And if you want to make a conscious decision to show up in jeans and a ratty shirt, it's your choice. But I would say, as somebody who grew up in an era where you were taught, sort of to look at the people above you, I would say you'd be better off dressing in a very corporate and professional and confident way. You can still express your style, right? You can wear the jacket with the flowers, I can wear the little bit more conservative, blue one. So you can still express your style. It doesn't mean being a drone, but I think in general, showing up confidently and professionally is always a good idea.
So we had some debate about this area, because, and I completely, and this is where we kind of settled out about this idea of you really, if you want to push the boundaries, know that you're pushing the boundaries and just do it consciously. But, styles evolve and young people evolve, and we want continued pushing. And I think of it, when I went to work at Frito-Lay in Plano, and I didn't wear stockings. And I scandalized some of the assistants in the office. Well, we'd all still be wearing stockings if there were young people who came in. So we want some of that, and that's why I always feel like this is, it needs to be conscious. Look, and then make the right kind of decision. But I also love the fact that, it's the workplace and what's acceptable for women in the workplace has evolved and will continue to evolve. So there's a little bit of push and pull on this one, I think.
Great, awesome. And then we have another question. How are you measuring the impact of your book and its great lessons?
I think one thing, we in the 29 or the 50 presentations we've done across every industry you can imagine, finance, law, agency, government agencies, nonprofit, university, it doesn't matter. I feel like the feedback we hear is always consistent. The women are always like, validating. I didn't know that people felt that way. I like to have language about it. Yes, it irritates me. The men a lot of times are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a thing. So the feedback has been very consistent. So I think in some cases people are actually using some of the shorthand language, like great idea, Greg, or be like Bill, or whatever the case may be. I think if people start talking about it, people won't do it, because the fact that I think some people I know will say, oh my God, I never use the word girl anymore. But before they had used it, all the time and didn't think anything about it. So I think us giving voice to it and the language is helping, and we're hearing people play that back all the time. And we have, we highlighted 3 stories today. We have tons of stories of people coming back and saying, I'm doing this different because of this, and this was an easy change. So that's been some of the feedback we've got.
One of the things that we've tried to do, and the answer isn't going to be, oh, we did a quantitative study and we found that gender bias went from this to this. That's not the answer. But one of the things, again, we're all marketers by background, so we used a lot of our storytelling techniques and also naming and branding things. And one of the things that we would love, and we'd invite everyone who's here tonight to do this, is use the language. So we'll do it sometimes, we have our weekly calls and we'll be talking and someone will talk over someone and then one of us will say, did you just great idea, Greg, me? And so it's a little bit like Seinfeld and the close talker. Language is really helpful. It's a great little shorthand, and also hopefully it takes the emotion out of it. So I don't want anyone to ever feel like it's proprietary. I would invite you, everything that you read in the book or that you've heard tonight, please use it. Use it in your common language. We would love for it to be part of the vernacular.
Awesome. And yes?
You first. Yeah, it's the same question, but you get a different reaction from different generations.
So it's a good question. I think these are broad generalizations I'm going to give. When we've been in a lot of corporations and the men who are, let's say, 40 plus, there seems to be a little bit of an eye-opening. We get and a lot of like, oh wow, I have daughters. This is kind of, I'm gonna pay extra close attention. So you get a little bit of I didn't know that was a thing. We've talked to a couple business schools, and that's what was really interesting, because these are younger folks. They've been in the workforce, so they're not, they're not totally naive. Those guys are a little more clued in, so the conversation, and they're having so many more conversations about culture and diversity and things like that in school. So they're a little bit more aware. They have allyship clubs, so they're just a little bit more aware. But still, I think overall, folks are looking for ideas on what they can do, and that's been pretty universal, I'd say, and especially for allies. Allies want to know what can they do or say in a moment when they see something happen. So that's been really rewarding.
I think the one thing that was a surprising generational thing that we actually learned in the research is when we talked to younger women, they were surprised when they got to the workplace that things switched, because they grew up and it was a girl's world and girl power, and they are doing so much better. They're graduating at higher rates in high school. They're the class president. They're going to the better schools. They're getting the sports scholarship. They have the world by the tail. They think of the boys in this case as kind of almost dopes. They're not even keeping up. I mean, they are slaying it, right? And then they go to college and they do the same thing. And then they get to the work world, and then all of a sudden, all this stuff changes, and it's because the fact it's the unwritten language and all these small things, and they're not, the part of the Sigma Chi, and so they're actually surprised. So I think our generation came into it knowing we were second class citizens, because the fact that 20% of our business school class was women, and 80%, and we were kind of more accommodating. This younger group is like, we've got the world by the tail, and so they actually come in, and it's actually surprising because the fact that they thought that they were. So I thought that was a very interesting generational difference.
Thank you.
Took the jacket off.
I did take the jacket off. I made it the longest I have ever made it. We were at Gatorade last week up on the stage, and literally we hadn't gotten to the first introduction, and the blazer came off. So this was record breaking.
Good.
It's very cool. It's very breathable. I really enjoy it.
I have a question. So I have two daughters, and I love what you're saying about all of those things that we can do, which, makes a lot of sense. But as you think about girls and women and now starting off in the workforce, are they top three things to make them feel more confident and more assured about the way that they present themselves?
Top three is hard. I'll throw one out.
Yeah.
And we'll give you
Well,
guys
three
some
of us,
time
we
to
could issue
think.
one,
One of the areas that we tend to talk a lot about is sponsors, and the importance of understanding what a sponsor is, and that, a mentor is somebody who, people go out and they search for a mentor, somebody they can talk to and they can learn from and things like that. What you really need is a sponsor. You need somebody who's got access to power, because what a sponsor is somebody who can speak for you in a room that you're not in. And so understanding that language and understanding the difference, understand what you're getting and what you need is something that, those differentiations didn't exist when we were. And I think it's important. It's not that easy to do, but knowing it's certainly the first step. So that is definitely one thing.
Yeah, so I'll go next, and I have a third in case you need to come up with one. So I think what I would say to young women especially is pick your battles. So I think for us, as we were growing up, I would say 90% of what we did was accommodate, because like as he said, we were so happy that we were there in this man's world. So we dressed like men, we wore like little rosettes, little bow tie, right? Ugh, imagine me in that. I feel like I'd be dying, but pantyhose in the summer, little rosettes. I mean, really. But we, as it related to behavior and things like that, we were 90% accommodate and 10% kind of use language and try and change things. I think left to their own devices, a lot of the young people, and I was 26 and 29-year-old, they'd be on the 90% speak up, just argue about everything, and 10% accommodate. And what I always say to them is, don't do what we do. Don't do all the accommodating, but don't make everything a thing. Not everything is a thing. So sort of pick your battles, choose wisely in terms of what you want to be associated with, pounding your fist on the table, being really productive about, and what sometimes it's okay to just let it go. So I would say be judicious about that.
The advice I give younger people is that don't assume good work is going to speak for itself. A lot of times women think, just because of all their educational history, that they would just kind of put their head down and do the work, and they'd get good grades and study and do all the right things, and then they get to the work world and they think that's gonna continue, and so a lot of times I know I would do that. I'd get to meetings and people would be talking about something that I think was interesting. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get my emails done, I'm gonna, be more productive, and I just put my head down, and I wasn't involved in some of the conversation, and I would have been better served to be talking to them about the Knicks and building relationships such that when I go into another meeting, I had built up that, that goodwill, and I think I was just like, put my head down and assume like good work will speak for itself, and it doesn't.
Lori, what's your second one?
When we were, thank you, Catherine.
It always tails off afterward, but go ahead.
When we
Never
were,
open the door for Lori. Okay, here we go.
do we have a wine? My jacket is off, I'm very comfortable, I could go all night. No, when we did the research, the primary research with younger women, one of the things that kept coming up was when we had all these examples of all these micro moments, but we weren't sure if they were still relevant or not. We're like, this used to happen to us, but is this still relevant? We did not want to write a book that wasn't relevant. So we went out and we surveyed all these women, largely 25 to probably 45. And many times when we went through the scenarios, they would say, like, Susan, we take the notes, they would say, oh, yes, that happens, but I just assumed it's because I was junior. And so at some point, like I say this to my daughter all the time, she's 26, like when she first started her company, I'm like, if you can get invited to the meeting with the senior people because you're taking the notes, do whatever you can to get in the meeting, right? But at some point, these women that we're talking to, they're 42, they're senior directors, they're no longer being asked to take the notes or plan the parties or do whatever because they're the most junior. And so that's the fourth piece of advice that I would have is for young people is be conscious of there's things that you do when you're junior because you want to be in the mix, you want to get in the room, but be conscious at some point you're not junior anymore and you have to be conscious about what you do and don't do.
So I think earlier you referred to your own ambition, and then you made a comment was made that maybe young people don't necessarily have the same goals as you did. This may be controversial. Do you find young women as ambitious as they should be?
Yeah, I don't know if I think we were talking more about accommodating.
Accommodating.
But, so here's what the research shows is that young women women in general are seeking to perform and move ahead. I think that it gets a little bit more nuanced. This is where I'm going to be a little sketchy on the research, that there's less willingness to trade off things. So
Versus us, versus what we were
versus
doing.
a more so trying harder to figure out how to make it all work and looking for things that make it all work. I don't know that that means you're less ambitious. I just think it means less willing to take one thing over the other.
But it might result in less business success.
It could, yeah. If that's
But it might be generational, it
Yeah.
might be that as well, yeah.
if you're in a field where it's harder, or a company where it's harder to do that. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say you made me really proud of my 24-year-old daughter who's just finishing her second year in a real job, and she, after the first year, she told her boss, I don't know how she had the audacity to do it, that she needed to take over the ordering of the swag because it was unacceptable.
You know what, it's funny, it's this is another story that we heard.
And he let her, I think he was so taken aback.
Yeah, it's such a tiny little thing, but it's so unconscious, and it continues to happen. We heard it from a young woman in the survey that we did. It was a group of young women that had just they had all gotten recognized for something, and they sent them this gift bag. It's supposed to be an acknowledgement, and it was all male-dominated stuff. It's like, way to take a good thing and shoot yourself in the foot with it. So that's awesome. That's a great story.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One is your story, I can't remember if it was Bill, Mike, or Greg, but, get the guys put the tie on to go have the meeting with the boss, and you tried to set up things for the women. What are these, you hear, I've heard from men, I'm afraid to mentor a woman because the sexual tension, and then what, and how about from the woman's perspective? That's question one, and the other one is addressing, this is like a huge topic, but the issues around pregnant women and what that does to their careers and how they handle it, and
Yeah.
It might be easier to answer the first.
I'll try, I'm gonna let Lori think about the
Okay,
second
I was
one
gonna
while I
say,
answer.
I'll do the first one, you do the pregnant
Well,
one.
I answered the first one, it's, you know, it's like it's the Mike Pence thing, right? Like the discomfort of being alone with a woman, and then obviously a backlash to the Me Too movement, and it has been a problem. And especially as we talk about the importance of sponsorship, and where we've kind of come down on this, and the advice that we give, especially to men, is you gotta treat people equally. So, and Angelique has a story of a woman, this happened very recently, where he had dinner with all of his male direct reports and had a phone call with a new female direct report. So like, you can't do that. You can have a conversation. If you're not comfortable having dinner with the woman alone, then don't have dinner with the man alone. It's kind of this basic rule of you're not going to say it to a man, don't say it to a woman. So figure it out. Do two people together. Think about different ways to do it. I had a guy ask me, you know, I'm leaving a restaurant, I'm out with my employees, and it makes sense for me to share an Uber with with this woman, but I don't want to get in an Uber. Like, is that weird? I'm like, don't get an Uber with her, but don't get an Uber with a guy either. Like, just kind of, it makes the rule, I think, a little bit simpler. But it's a conversation that folks need to have and just be consistent. That's the rule. That's how I would tell the men. The women is a different story. Because I think that is gonna be a judgment by judgment situation. We've all been in those situations where it's like, should I be doing this? Would this be something? And then just, you have to make a bit of a judgment call.
When we were writing the book, we had a huge debate in a good way. I mean, one of the things we like, and hopefully you'll like when you read the book, we like is that we don't agree on everything, and we think that's part of the joy of the book, right? It's not Arianna Huffington telling you this or Sheryl Sandberg telling you that, but the reality of it is there's 6 points of view plus the research. And so we love that we don't agree on things and we have different advice. But one of the times I remember we had it was probably hours long debate was about, I can remember back in the day, like you go to a city, you know, and we were preparing a customer presentation. It was myself and one of the key account guys, and one of us had a hotel room. We were in there and we were working hard on laptops, whatever, thought nothing of it. And so one of the questions that came up, which is, if your boss says to you, you're a woman, your boss is a man, says, hey, you know what, let's work on this thing or whatever, like, why don't you just have a suite, why don't you just come to my suite? And we really had very different, I have 2 daughters in their 20s, and I was like, no, because no one ever thinks, no one ever thinks their boss is Harvey Weinstein or whatever, but also the real reason that I got around to that was, if my daughter is seen walking out of that room, people aren't going to be gossiping about the man, they're going to be gossiping about my daughter. And that's just something that I don't think she needs. I think there's enough hurdles for women in the workplace. So we debated around that and saying, I would say things like, oh my God, yes, I would love to get together. Let's meet downstairs in the lobby bar, in the coffee shop or whatever. And if the guy says, why, I have a suite, like whatever. And I would say exactly that. You know what, if someone sees me walking out of your suite, they're going to be gossiping about me all day and all night. And so let's just not give them anything to gossip about. But that was an example of something where, again, it's not so cut and dried, and if you look back on, you know, your experience, there's probably things that I did 30 years ago that I wouldn't do today.
I think what I would add, it's make it not binary, where it's like, you're gonna go there, you're not gonna go there, find another way. If you're not gonna have dinners, then have lunches, you know, like, find other ways, and both sides need to be proactive, I think, to make that happen, to remove the I guess, sensitivity of it.
Yeah, and to answer your question about pregnancy, we always say, like, we're not policy people, we're not HR experts, you know. I have it too, yes. But this actually came up last week, a question about women and maternity leave and things like that, and I feel like over here was quoting Angelique, but Angelique has a wonderful story. She has 2 stories, and I think that they illustrate both sides of this. So one of her stories is she was pregnant, I think, with her first child, first trimester, hadn't told anybody yet that she was pregnant. And it turns out she was at work, there was a big presentation that they were working on, and she was spotting. And she called her doctor, and the doctor said, like, get in the car, like, come to the hospital now. And she was like, well, you know how we all are, well, there's a big presentation about soda. a soda crisis. And the doctor was, and so the doctor was like, just, I don't care what you're doing, like, get here now. And she was taking notes, she was a junior person, she was project managing it. And so she called her boss, and her boss didn't even know she was pregnant yet. And she called her boss to say, hey, I know I haven't told you I'm pregnant yet, but you know, good news is I'm pregnant. Bad news is I'm spotting and I need to get to the doctor right now. I have the presentation, I can leave it on my laptop, I'll leave you, don't drive, whatever, but I need to leave. And the boss said, and I quote, do you really need to leave? Oh, okay.
We know his name.
We know his name. And so Angelique tells the story, like at that moment, she was so disheartened. This is when she was still at PepsiCo. She was so disheartened with the company. And it was one of those like WTF moments, right? Same woman, Angelique, thank God, has a baby, healthy child. And maybe it was after her second. And she had two, maybe 18 months apart, pretty close in age, and as she said, like 2 colicky babies, tiny New York City apartment, commuting up to the suburb, and she was just, I think she was completely overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't even come back after the first, and she was trying to decide what to do. She felt like she had to solve it all and come up with a plan, but she talked to her HR person, and the HR person just listened and listened and listened, and finally said, Angelique, what do you need? What would you like? How can we be helpful? And those simple words, how can we be helpful, right? Those 5 words, Angelique said at that moment, like my stress melted away. I still had 2 colicky kids in a small New York City apartment. But she said at that moment, she was like, oh, okay, like you're gonna work with me. We're on the same side. And she talks about, like, she probably stayed with the company another 15 years or so. I mean, she stayed with the company a very long time. And she said it was that moment that her loyalty for the company, like she doubled and tripled down on the company, because at a moment where she needed it, somebody wasn't quoting policy or talking about precedent, whatever, they were just like, what do you need? How can we be helpful? And so I think I don't have all the answers about, maternity leaves and things like that. I think it's a very complex issue. I think there's a lot more that's needed, but I think we can all start, every one of us, by approaching it in a human way versus a policy way and worrying about precedent kind of way.
I have a question. I've worked for women's organizations most of my life, and so it's really dealing with a different dynamic because you're not dealing with male versus female, but there's still a lot of office politics if you're in a strictly women's organization.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you address anything like that.
We don't address it specifically, other than we recognize, like I said, that we've been on both sides of this. We have looked at these things and we're just like, oh, I did that. I mean, we were in meetings where we talked about people planning meetings where it's like, oh yeah, she'll never move, her husband has this way. Like we had that same kind of lens. So I think as you are in different positions of power or seniority and things like that, sometimes it's not just a gender thing, it's just a thing. So there are things that can apply, the same situations can apply for women as leaders as well as, people who are, I guess, victims.
I think that this isn't an answer to the all-women organization, but a lot of times we'll hear people say, like, they're senior women and they're not being that helpful. In some cases, I think that when a few women do make it up or did make it up, a lot of times they didn't want to seem like, okay, now I'm here and I'm just going to be like, what about the women? What about so they actually, probably in some cases less helpful because they don't want to be tagged as that. So that's always kind of that tricky.
Well, I think it's
balance.
easier to take a risk on somebody when you're standing in a position of security, and if you're one of the only women at the top, to go out of the way. And if it's hard to get a woman up, this again, that's, I mean. There's bad apples everywhere on both sides, so it's not without, but I think that can be a driver as well.
One other thing I would just add to that, I think in doing the research for the book, and then we've been so blessed to be out talking to so many different companies, of course we learn from everyone, we learn from the questions, we learn from their stories, and I think, so we always say, we talk about like leadership and culture, we're doing it through the lens of gender bias, and something that I always say to people is, having gender bias doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean like you're prejudiced or whatever. Like if you breathe, if you're alive, you have gender bias, you have bias. Everybody has unconscious bias, right? We all have it. And so rather than treating it as binary, like do I have it or not have it, you sort of look through the lens of every day is a learning moment, like what can I learn, what biases do I have, and then how do I sort of do less of the crappy things and more of the better things. What I would say is in an all women's organization, there's other types of bias as well, and I feel like doing this work on gender bias has just made me more aware of things like racial bias, age bias, things like that. So I think the learning that you have on this can apply to other areas. We've gotten a lot of questions about ageism and things like that. And so I think that there's other biases, including gender bias, but I think there's other biases as well. And if you could take this almost as like an invitation to learn and realize that everybody, the person experiencing it, allies and leaders all have a role to play.
All right, on that note.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
you, ladies.
Yes, thank you, Nina.
Yes, thank you, Nina.
Yes, right?
Yes.
That's great, thank you.
Yes.